For us now in New York. Sherwin, good evening to you here. Good morning to you there. There's a strong link between Mandela Day and the United Nations Development Agenda.
And we heard that from a number of speakers, Stephen, the Secretary General, the President of the General Assembly, Gay MacDougall, many people drawing a straight line between what this legacy and continuing the legacy of Nelson Mandela means and linking it to the 2030 agenda, whether you're talking about the elimination of poverty by 2030, whether you're talking about Goal 5, gender equality, women's empowerment, the need for access to quality healthcare and education, and of course the lags we are seeing in the implementation of this agenda, Stephen, no less on the question of climate change. We hear the Secretary General trumpet this message that the mitigation required is not keeping pace with the change in our climate that we are seeing in the world today. And the message from Nelson Mandela before he passed was that it's in our hands. And what better way to emulate that and to encapsulate that vision than to put the SDGs in everyone's hands, because it's a collective effort that is required here. And we are not seeing the level of commitment from all nations when it comes to the implementation of that agenda. So that was really the message. Let's take Madiba's vision on social justice and incorporate that into the SDGs. But in addition to that, Stephen, there were also some personal reflections. We talk about Gay MacDougall. She was the human rights lawyer and observer at the time in 1994, standing alongside Nelson Mandela at the Onanga primary school in Inanda, Durban, when he cast that pivotal vote in 1994. And she said there were 4 things that she thinks about when she thinks about the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Let me quickly read that to you, Stephen. She says he taught her about the power of personal courage and integrity. Personal courage, of course, the courage he demonstrated when he was in jail and when he emerged after. His humility, but with an assured courage and self-esteem. His life taught us about leadership and the importance of collective leadership. Let's not forget that this was a president that served one term and decided to step down, and how his life has taught us the powerful lesson of forgiveness and reconciliation. The point Gay MacDougall made was that Mandela was not necessarily not angry when he came out, but he understood the broader vision of his responsibility, and that's why he chose nation building over revenge. So, in a nutshell, that's what we talked about today here at the official commemoration.
And Sherwin, all of this must fit rather interestingly into US politics. There have been comments by the US President Donald Trump this week, generally seen as racist, incidents at 1 or 2 rallies as well. People were chanting this phrase, "send them back," making those claims about specific people in Congress. A link's being drawn between what Madiba stood for and the current political mood in the US.
Very much so. The deputy mayor of New York was one of the keynote speakers at that commemoration, and he chose to include in his speech that received some applause, midway through his remarks, Stephen, really reflecting on the current political mood. Many viewers will understand that there's a current debate around whether the president's words and his tweets are racist. The targeting of 4 minority congresswomen at a rally last night in North Carolina. Cheers when the president was speaking, that Ilhan Omar, the former Somali refugee and now congresswoman from Minnesota, who is critical of this administration, that she should go back home, that she should be sent back. This is how Phil Thompson chose to address it in that commemoration earlier today.
These days, as I'm sure you know, the United States is changing. Soon, the entire United States will look like New York City. There will be no racial or ethnic majority. People whose ancestors were enslaved or colonized, people who still languish and suffer at the bottom of our economic and social hierarchy will soon choose our presidents and choose our Congress. This prospect has created an existential fear among some people. We have leaders in very high office organizing rallies, as recently as last night, demanding that members of Congress who want to make change, particularly those whose ancestors came from Africa or Latin America, should leave the United States and go back to Africa and Latin America. Let me just say, we are proud to have come from Africa and Latin America, and we plan to go back and visit often. But we are not leaving this country. We built this country as much as anyone. My own ancestors worked for 250 years as slaves in this country and then worked for another 100 years under American apartheid, making other people rich. We are not going anywhere.
So that really just gives you a flavour of the current political narrative in this country. And remember, Stephen, we are more than 400 days out from Election Day next November. So expect more of this as we move closer to that date.
And then other events planned at the United Nations as well today for Mandela Day. What will officials there be doing, Sherwin?
Well, as I'm speaking to you, a number of officials, I think including the President of the General Assembly, are at a Brownsville kitchen. That's about an hour away from where we are in Brooklyn, New York, and they are serving lunch to members of a disadvantaged community in that area. And then a little later today, Stephen, the South African mission to the United Nations and the Norwegian mission will unveil what they're calling a peace bench. This is a peace bench developed by the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo, Norway, and essentially it is a curved shape, and what they want to encourage at the United Nations on this particular day of Nelson Mandela International Day is the importance of multilateralism, and with that the importance of dialogue. So if you look at the shape of this curved sort of arch-like bench, the idea is that if you try and sit on the outside of that bench, you will slide into the middle until your shoulders touch, and they want to encourage dialogue, multilateralism, and more of that in a world that so desperately requires more talking and less fighting.
Our SABC correspondent in New York tonight, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Thank you very much indeed.